Welcome to The Quiet Truth, where lay Catholics face the horrors of the modern secular culture. I'm Tom Borek with today's installment, Prelude to Horror, or Let's Split Up. In a way, our videos remind me of a horror film. Both begin with the foreshadowing of danger. In our prior videos, you may have learned of evil and self-destructive messages embedded in our fiction, in the doctrines of Protestant and post-Protestant sects, and even in apparently rational political discourse. In a horror film, it may be evidence of a gruesome death, or even just mysterious voices, or a glimpse of a ghost. At this point, in the horror films I grew up with, the band of heroes and potential victims would gather together to make plans. Then someone would say, "Let's split up." And for some reason, everyone on screen would say, "Yes, great idea, let's split up." And everyone in the audience would think, "No, don't split up. That's the worst possible thing you could do." Of course, the characters would then split into several small vulnerable groups, at least one of which would meet with disaster. Until modern times, most people lived their entire lives in a large protective group, the family, an institution consistent with natural law and the teachings of Christ. No other institution meets the needs of children as well, and no other institution prepares children so well to raise their own faith-filled children in the future. Now, as well as the nuclear family works, the extended family works even better. Children who benefit from the love, support, and guidance of a father and mother benefit even more when also exposed to loving uncles, aunts, and grandparents. Yet the modern cultural message sent to every Catholic family innumerable times and in innumerable ways is, let's split up. By breaking up the extended family, our culture leaves the nuclear family and its minor children more vulnerable than ever before. In part, this is a matter of technology and economics. Many of us now have the opportunity to consider career options throughout the nation, and most of us can afford to set up separate households when we are relatively young. That is understandable, but let us not ignore the cultural messages that also push us in that direction by appealing to our selfishness, our lust, and our pride. Message number one, directed to our children just old enough to have graduated from high school, is this: move out of your parents' household as soon as possible. Children who choose to live at home when they have other options are often ridiculed by their peers. They are considered immature and inappropriately tied to their parents. Of course, part of this insistence upon separate housing is about the privacy needed to have sex outside of marriage. Another part is the desire for independence and control. I'm 18, so I shouldn't have to live under your rules. I should be able to play my music as loud as I want, and I should be able to drink milk right out of the carton. Notice that this is not a good attitude to bring to marriage and parenting. Yet another part of the reasoning for this is the belief that an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old now has the knowledge, judgment, and temperament to make adult decisions. Here's the short critique of this reasoning. 2 words: car insurance. A successful billion-dollar industry has determined that 18 to 26-year-olds, human beings at the height of their physical abilities, generally cannot be trusted to drive a car without risking their lives. They not only drive drunk, talk on the phone, have slap fights, and break all the rules of the road, they also send and receive text messages while they are driving. And believe they are safe because, and I kid you not, I did it before and I didn't die. Nevertheless, our culture insists that these individuals are fully formed adults, no longer in need of parental guidance, who should live alone, make all their own decisions, and be free to procreate at will and raise the next generation in their image. Let us consider God's 4th commandment: honor thy father and thy mother. In biblical times, this commandment was clearly understood as a lifetime duty of respect, obedience, and love. A child of any age was expected to seek parental approval before making any major life decision, before moving from home or changing jobs or marrying. And of course, the child was further obliged to refrain from embarrassing his or her parents by spending nights with others to whom they were not married. Somehow, in modern times, this commandment has come to be associated mainly with the obligations of small children. Pick up your toys, do your homework, don't talk back. If it is applied to adult children at all, it is seen as obliging us to attend the annual holiday dinner and to try not to offend Grandma and Grandpa while doing it. The idea that a 21-year-old, 25-year-old, or 30-year-old man or woman should defer to parental wishes is so countercultural that it seems almost crazy. Consider the parable of the prodigal son. He demanded his share of his father's wealth that he expected to inherit someday and went off to live as he liked. He made poor choices, lived unwisely, and ended up broke and hungry. He realized that even his father's employees were living better than he was, so he returned home to beg forgiveness and to ask to become his father's servant. Now, because it's a parable, the father in the story showed us how God the Father treats us when we sin and truly repent. He gave his son rich clothing and presents and held a feast to welcome him home. He loved him and honored him as if he had never left. What does this parable tell us about the relationship between children and their parents? Is the message that we should all behave like the prodigal son and do whatever we want and then expect forgiveness? I don't think so. Clearly, the son had sinned, and everyone listening to Jesus tell the parable knew that the prodigal had sinned. But his sin wasn't just that he had made some bad spending choices. His sin would have been just as great if he had managed to make some great business deals and ended up rich. His sin was acting against his father's wishes and moving away to live as he liked. His sin was abandoning his family and the guidance of his parents. His sin was shirking his obligation of obedience and respect. We should avoid that sin even though our peers and our culture approve of and encourage it. Later in life, we receive a second message. Don't live with your parents when they get old. As our parents age, they often become increasingly isolated. Some end up in retirement communities, isolated from nearly all younger people. Many spend their last days in nursing homes, tended by grossly underpaid and overworked certified nursing assistants. These arrangements are not consistent with the biblical command to honor thy father and thy mother, which was intended, as I mentioned, to create a lifelong obligation of respect and care. The modern trend to delegate the care of and even companionship with the elderly to non-relatives is not an improvement for the elderly or for their grandchildren. Now, I do not contend that every decision to move away from one's parents or every nursing home placement is inappropriate or sinful. Certainly, there are financial and other factors that sometimes justify or force us into these decisions. My own loving and generous parents were adamantly opposed to living with any of their children's families because they did not want to be a burden. For the best of motives, they had, unfortunately, accepted the cultural message that only members of nuclear families with minor children should live together. So, for a variety of reasons, frequently, children are raised on a daily basis by only one or two parents and are deprived of daily contact with adult members of their extended families. You may ask, why is this a problem? Isn't two the perfect number of adults to raise their own biological children? The answer depends upon the historical context. Back when living with extended families was the norm, that is, prior to the Industrial Revolution, two parents might have been sufficient to provide children with guidance on the road to responsible Catholic adulthood. I still contend that even then, they would generally have been better off if exposed to loving extended families. Nonetheless, I cannot be sure that isolating nuclear families back in the 1700s or the 1600s would have had particularly bad consequences. In the 21st century, however, even when both parents live with their children, love them, and try their best to parent them, the challenges and difficulties are enormous, as is the chance of failure. By failure, I mean one's offspring's 1. Inability or unwillingness to complete high school, 2. Chronic unemployment or underemployment, 3. Drug addiction, 4. Sexual promiscuity, 5. Abortion, 6. Conceiving children out of wedlock, 7. Divorce, 8. Criminal convictions, 9. Eating disorders, 10. Suicide, and 11. Estrangement from God and His church. Yes, for all of our impressive scientific advances, successful parenting has gotten more difficult and more prone to failure for at least 2 reasons. 1, the overwhelming cultural support for sin and stupidity, and 2, the limited time available for parenting. Before the Industrial Revolution, when most children lived on multi-generational family farms, they had access to both parents throughout the workday. In 21st century America, most parents work outside the home on a full-time basis. The remaining parent-child time is further reduced by legally or culturally mandated activities like school, homework, sports, lessons, and various structured play activities. In other words, just as support from the extended family is most urgently needed, it is least likely to be available. A nuclear family, even a 2-parent nuclear family, in contemporary society is a fragile thing. Thank you for your kind attention.